Okay, so I'm Noam. I grew up in Israel at the age of 25, 30 years ago. I moved to the United States, 6 years in Seattle, and since 2002, I've been living in West Newton, not so far from here. So what happened? I'll pick up where Helen left off. At December of last year, the commission basically ended its life. There is no longer an official body like the commission. They submitted a final report. The report contains 50 recommendations, and some of them are in the introductory part. They're more generic and about general recommendations, and then they go into specific areas, in particular those pertaining to education. Many of the recommendations are okay. They're good. They are touching some of the important things one needs to do when fighting anti-Semitism. But some are very problematic. And I'm going to touch on one of them that Helen mentioned, the IHRA, or IHRA definition. And then Gretchen is going to address the other problematic recommendations associated with education. So the commission recommends as follows: educators and other actors charged with implementing these recommendations should be informed of and by IHRA's definition and its examples. So what is this document? It was created in 2004 by this body listed here, MCU, and for the purposes of, it was an intergovernmental body that was trying to align the different agencies that were monitoring, tracking anti-Semitism in Europe, okay? The document, as you'll see in a second, includes a definition and a bunch of examples. And some of these examples, most of them actually, mention Israel and specifically criticism of Israel. And because of that, from the very moment that it was created, the document was controversial. And one of its main authors, Kenneth Starr, immediately expressed his concern that these documents should not be abused in any way, that it could be abused to silence legitimate speech, and that it shouldn't be. And because of these concerns, the EU decided to not adopt the document. However, in 2016, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that's IHRA, did decide to endorse it. And from then on, in the following several years, it's been taken up by several countries and institutions. And at the same time, the controversy was not over. For example, again, Kenneth Starr in 2016 wrote a piece about his concerns with using it at the New York Times, and later that year testified to the same, with the same message before Congress. So what is this document? So you don't have to try and read all of this in the small letters, but this is the IHRA. We call it shorthand the IHRA definition, but it's really a combination of definition and 11 examples, okay? And the definition is pretty straightforward. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. The examples, some of them are also pretty straightforward. So each of these examples is supposed to be an example of anti-Semitic behavior or statement. So it is an example of anti-Semitism to call for, aid, or justify the killing of or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. And the problem is that not all the examples are like this. So 7 out of the 11 examples actually mention Israel, and a few of them, 3 are particularly problematic, and those are the ones I'm going to talk about a little bit right now. So the first one says that an example of anti-Semitism is denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, but claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So one problem with this is that it's a little bit vague. The meaning of what is the right of self-determination is not clear-cut. For example, does self-determination mean that one has to have majority rule in one's country? The first few meetings of the Zionist Congress did not reach a decision to support a Jewish majority state in Israel, Palestine. Only later did they converge on that. So it was not an obvious consequence of wanting self-determination. And to this day, there are lots of Jews in Israel and here that believe that Israel should and could be democratic and Jewish. And at the same time, there are other people, some Israelis like me and others that are not, and some non-Jews, that think that you cannot really have a democratic country, a democratic state, that also insists somehow by law that a certain ethnicity within it, a certain people within it, will maintain a majority. So, and these kind of views will be labeled as anti-Semitic according to this example. Another aspect, and that pertains more to the second part of this, many people think, I am among them, that Israel has always been racist towards the non-Jewish, the Palestinian inhabitants of Israel-Palestine. And again, that's, according to this definition, is problematic. It's a hate speech. The other example calls out applying double standards by requiring Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. So first thing is, I mean, it does say here, demanded of any other democratic nation. I don't think there are other democratic nations that have been accused of the level of violations of human rights and the international law as Israel has. But there are a few others, and definitely they're not spared any criticism. But the way this argument usually is used, and I've had people say this to me, why are you picking on Israel? What about? And then they say, some other country. And basically the implication is that if you focus your criticism and your efforts as an activist or when you speak out, you focus that on Israel, that must imply somehow some ulterior motive, some hidden agenda of anti-Semitism. But there are many reasons why people focus their criticism or their energy and activism on a particular topic. I spend most of my activism energy on the topic of Israel-Palestine because it's my society, it's my people. I am sometimes, some of the things done here, there are done in my name. And other people, other Jews in America feel the same. Things are done in their name. They feel a connection and they feel responsible. Of course, many Palestinians feel it's very relevant to them. It is relevant to them. It's their families and their heritage that is being trampled on. And of course, many other people have their own personal reasons, maybe a particular personal encounter. It doesn't matter. There are many valid reasons why someone is focusing on a particular topic, and it doesn't mean that they don't care about other topics. Another reason why many Americans specifically care about Israel is because of the level of aid that the United States is giving Israel, and they feel complicit in all the bad things that Israel is doing. The point of these things that I'm bringing up is not that you necessarily agree with his views, and I'm going to say it again later, but that you accept that these views can be debated and discussed, and in and of themselves, they are not a sign of hatred or bias. The third example is drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. As you heard from Helen's testimony, when when any person faces or sees or becomes aware of humanization of horrific things, they draw from their own experience. They draw from their collective experience. It's very natural to use these comparisons, at least for some of us. Now, we all know, the Holocaust is a sensitive topic and one should be careful about it, but a lot of people are making these comparisons because they feel they are apt. And going all the way back, and people in Israel do that. It's just ridiculous to think that something like that would be considered anti-Semitic when there are Jews and Israeli Jews as well that are using this, because that's what we know. This is the history we're drawing from. This is particularly relevant in the context of genocide. So whether you agree or not with what there seems to be a consensus of among human rights organizations and scholars of genocide and scholars of Holocaust, that what Israel has done in Gaza is a genocide, and it's okay not to agree with that. The question is, can it be discussed? Can we have a rational discussion about it? And in particular, for our students, by law in Massachusetts, the topic of genocide is being taught every year to students from the 6th grade to the 12th grade, if I'm not mistaken. And in that unit, by law, they need to be talking about the Holocaust. But they also talk about other examples. The students are not stupid, and they live in this world, and they hear from their parents, and they see on TV. And the question of whether or not Israel has committed genocide in Gaza is something that should be engaged with. If we label mentioning this as anti-Semitism because it's comparing to the Nazis, then what teacher would dare have this discussion in class? And in that way, we will be depriving our students an opportunity to learn and to engage and to discuss. So this is not a good thing. Our main concerns, as I said, first of all, is the suppression of free speech. This has already been happening. And I presented several views and perspectives that I know some in the room here disagree with. But the question is, and I hope that most of you, or I hope that all of you, will agree that these are views that can be and should be allowed in the public sphere for discussion and for debate, and should not be excluded just because somebody labels them hate speech. And I used examples from what Jews and Israelis and myself think, just to highlight how ridiculous it is to identify such views as anti-Semitic. But I should stress and name very clearly, anyone expressing such views should not be forced to show credentials of a Holocaust survivor or Jew or Israeli in order to be able to say this without being blamed as anti-Semitic. The other thing that we're concerned about with these recommendations is that they trivialize in some way the fight against anti-Semitism, because these weak and problematic definitions can pull the rug under more serious attempts to fight anti-Semitism and provide cover for true anti-Semites who would say, no, this is just another Israeli propaganda when they're called out. So this is a concern. And our ask is pretty clear. The IHRA definition should be rejected. Because of the pressure of groups like us, the Commission did include in its report a mention of two other definitions, the Jerusalem Declaration and the Nexus definition. They are decent definitions without these deep problems. And with that, I will pass it on to Gretchen.